it's pretty rare to have a rapprochement, if you will, if you have a kind of a re-engagement with somebody that has stimulated and inspired and challenged you for a long, long time. My connection through literature that was wrought from the pen and the typewriter and the mind and heart and soul of Annie Dillard dates back to Jim Corder. And Jim Corder at TCU said that I needed to read Annie Dillard. I was not quite back in school. I had had a 2-year hiatus working in South Central LA and was visiting on the campus and dropped in to see him. And he had taught me freshman comp and told me some poets and others to pay attention to. And he said, you might want to get this book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. And I did. And the rest is history. She is a phenomenal writer, a phenomenal presence, phenomenal artist. And we will engage with her today. This is a picture of Annie Dillard down in Key West, where she spends a portion of every year. And we will get to see her workshop there in Key West. This is her smiling countenance. And she was born in 1945, April the 30th. So a brief review of her, at least the facts and figures that mark her journey. She was born Meta Ann Doak. Meta, that's interesting that she's more, that is her name. I don't know the ethnicity or nationality background of that, but she was the oldest daughter. She had the only room that didn't have a roommate in it in her home in Pittsburgh. Her mother was a nonconformist, Pam Lambert Doak. Her father was very energetic. He conveyed the wonders of the novel On the Road to the entire family and the call of adventure, which he answered by quitting his job and heading off on a trip down the Mississippi River once. He came back eventually. I can remember this wonderful description in An American Childhood where Annie Dillard describes him wearing his weekend khakis. He was part of the business there in Pittsburgh, but and he was part, and his family was, and so was Annie Dillard, part of the country club set. During her childhood, one of her favorite books was the Field Book of Ponds and Streams. Interesting. Water and bodies of water will attend all of her life. She went to a kind of a prestigious school, the Ellis School. In her high school years, she rebelled against this affluence and the country club culture, and her academic interest shifted towards poetry. She quit in an official way the Shady Side Presbyterian Church, and we'll see some pictures of this later, because of the hypocrisy that she witnessed. But the associate pastor, Dr. Blackwood, contacted her, and they had some meetings, and they had a discussion of C.S. Lewis. And she kind of went back into the church. We'll see some pictures of that church, and we'll ponder a little bit about how formative that was. She went to Hollins College, and she would marry prior to her graduation. Pretty much in her sophomore year, her writing instructor, Richard Dillard, who at one time she said, he taught me everything I know about writing. She would attain Phi Beta Kappa by the time she was a junior. That's pretty rarefied air. She graduated from Hollins, both her undergraduate in 1967 and then her graduate degree in 1968, writing her thesis on Thoreau's Walden. She dabbled in Sufism, which is a very rarefied part of Islam. We know about the Shias and the Sunnis, but Sufism, which is saturated in the Persian part of that world, or where Persia used to be, and especially in Turkey, is a mystical tradition. Buddhism as well, Eskimo religious traditions, Hasidic Judaism, and she will write about that in one of her books fairly extensively. She attended an Episcopal church, but she would eventually convert to Catholicism. She endured a near fatal bout of pneumonia. And then in 74, she had two books published. First, a book of poems. And we could say that she really began, and she's always been a poet. And a lot of people have described Pilgrim at Tinker Creek as basically a poetic prose poem, if you will. In 75, that book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, when she is barely the age of 30, wins the Pulitzer Prize. She will retreat to Waldron Island, which is a long kind of island that has no electricity, no telecommunications off of the coast of Seattle. It's part of the San Juan archipelago up there. And she will then take a ferry over to Western Washington University, where she'll be scholar in residence for about 5 years. She then gets to Wesleyan University, where she will teach for 21 years before being made emeritus. She'll have a divorce from Dillard and then marry Gary Clevidence and have a daughter with him, Cody Rose, in 84. She will eventually divorce Clevidence in 88 and marry Robert Richardson, who is a very, very esteemed biographer of Emerson as and other members of the Transcendental Movement in the United States. In 2014, President Obama will award her the National Medal for the Arts and Humanities. In 2020, her husband, Robert D. Richardson, dies of complications suffered from a fall on Cape Cod. So here are some pictures of the earlier parts of her life. The painting that the watercolor in the upper left-hand side is done later in her life, but this is her family, and she's the one, I think, in the bathing cap. She's the oldest of three daughters. Shadyside Presbyterian Church is pictured in from the back, looking towards the Christ mosaic in the chancel area, and we see that chancel area there on the left. Looking from the front, we see the rose window at the back, and she describes this place in An American Childhood fairly extensively. We see the exterior portion of Shadyside Presbyterian Church and Dr. Scharf, to whom she wrote the letter. But Dr. Blackwood, the person that responded to the letter that took care of this resignation from the church, was another person, not the person depicted here. These early pictures of her smoking a cigarette in college, as she is at Hollins College, depict her on her way to Pilgrim Creek. The picture, the small picture of her staring at the viewer, is one that was used in promotions. Down below, where she's kneeling by the tree, that's Tinker Creek. So is the color picture in the middle. This is Tinker Creek, a creek in Virginia. The workshop where she's peering through from the outside actually is a cabin, presumably from Waldron Island, which is depicted in the lower right-hand corner from the kind of the northwest corner of one of my favorite islands, Orcas Island, that you can see over to Waldron. And Orcas Island is a place that my wife Priscilla and I did vacations for almost 14 years in a row. In the latter half of her life, we see pictures of her in her maturity. In the middle is her Key West workshop. She played softball for the longest time. She played second base, I think it was. In this, she shared an affinity for baseball and also the the position, I think, with Fred Craddock. I think Fred was a second baseman as well. But you can see on the left-hand wall of her study there, some paintings that we will see in just a moment that she got into. She, in addition to writing, she got into doing a lot of painting, watercolors and oils, and she sold these to help out some relief efforts there in Key West to help the world heal. Go back to the picture, Brent. In the lower left-hand corner is a picture of her daughter, who is also a poet. She's esteemed enough in the poetry world that she's taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop. In the middle, in the bottom, is a picture of her doing a book signing in Key West. In the upper right-hand corner is her receiving the National Medal of Arts and Literature, or Humanities, excuse me. And in the lower right, we see Robert Richardson, her husband, who just recently died 2 years ago. I want to use two images for you to kind of concretize who Annie Dillard is, and just to, before we get to her books, and that is some images. One is this image of Tinker Creek, to just take it in and understand all the multitudinous wonders that are available in a setting like this. For you, it may be not Tinker Creek, it may be the Pacific Ocean, it may be your backyard, it may be a view that you have out your window, it may be just the potted plant on the kitchen windowsill. Whatever it is, the world is awash in wonders. And I'd like you to just use this as a symbol for that thesis. The next slide is her workshop in Key West. And this is the accrual of years and years and years of interest and curiosities, of itches scratched, and of time spent in meditation and thinking. When we look at her books, we will see that she has been focused upon, consumed by, some people may even say obsessed with, things like death, ultimate questions, like we all are. And I think that Annie Dillard would be quick to say, everybody wake up, you have your own workshop. It may not be writing, it may not be painting, you may not play baseball, but you have, at least inside your mind and your heart and soul, or someplace maybe where you live, a place where you're trying to work out understanding some ultimate questions. Next slide. Where do we start with her writing? In the top row of these books, we have her, they're in chronological order all the way over to the book on the far right that says, Give It All, Give It Now, and I'll talk a little bit about that. That's the most recent book that is basically one sentence from the writing life that has been made into kind of a picture book, a kind of almost a gift book. But Tickets for a Prayer Wheel, the book of poems in the far left, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and then Holy the Firm is an astonishing production in the first three books that she has written. By the time that she is 32 years old, she's produced a book of poems, a nonfiction narrative, and then Holy the Firm, which is a long, some may say, prose poem, but it really is theology. She almost published Pilgrim at Tinker Creek under a man's name because she didn't know, and she said, would anybody read theology if they were reading it from a woman at that time? That's 1974. We don't think that way anymore because there's women theologians everywhere. Shady Side Presbyterian Church, which used to have that kind of Geneva collared, tabbed preacher in its pulpit, now has a woman pastor as their senior pastor. But back in the day, there were challenges to women. This was long before feminism came to predominate, and before, she wondered if it would even get published under her own name. But she did it under her own name, and the rest is history. The Living and the Maitreys are both novels, and I put those 5 books at the top because they are kind of how her reputation rests. Although Living by Fiction, Teaching a Stone to Talk, Encounters with Chinese Writers in American Childhood, which is a memoir, The Writing Life, which is about writing, and For the Time Being, are all splendid books. They are great books, in my opinion. If you take Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, Wholly the Firm, the third book from the left on the top, and then For the Time Being, the last book on the right on the bottom corner, those 3 form a kind of trilogy, if you will. And they are all about what do we do with evil in the world, whether it's human evil, whether it's Putin invading Ukraine, or whether it's natural evil, which is what is taken up in Wholly the Firm, about an accident that causes a young girl's face to be burned. And how do we deal with such devastations? How do we deal? The word is theodicy. How do we deal with and reckon a good God in such a world where calamities happen? This book, that it was the last book on the top. You can see this. This is Give It All, Give It Now. And the whole book is this sentence or series of sentences, and that's it. And I want to recite this out loud for you, but I'd like you, Brent, if you could take off of the slide position of the show, and let me just try to show what this book is like. It is a picture book with beautiful paintings, and it's an accordion. It all goes out. It's about 30-something pages, stretching out these sentences into 2 or 3 words per page. And it's extraordinary. It needs to be among the books that you get for your library. I know that these great souls, you're trying to get a selected representation of each of the great souls. But I want to suggest that you add this one. It shouldn't be the only one you have from Annie Dillard, but you need to see this. And it is one of my most precious possessions, this one sentence. Now let's go back to the slide. One of the things I know about writing is this: spend it all, shoot it, play it, lose it all, right away, every time. Do not hoard what seems good for a later place in the book or for another book. Give it all, give it now. The impulse to save something good for a better place later is the signal to spend it now. Something more will arise for later, something better. These things fill from behind, from beneath, like well water. Similarly, the impulse to keep to yourself what you have learned is not only shameful, it is destructive. Anything you do not give freely and abundantly becomes lost to you. You open your safe and find ashes. I think that that's not only a good thing for writing, but a good thing for stewardship, and a good thing for engagement in church life, a good thing with regard to Lenten disciplines, which some of you may be engaging now as we are in the Lenten season. So give it all, give it now. What she says about the writing life is also pertinent to what it means to be a human being. There are, by the way, no internet video resources for Annie Dillard. Sadly, to some of you who like to learn that way best, you're not going to find it. The only video that I think that you can find is her receiving the National Medal of Arts and Humanities from President Obama. And this is intentional. She intentionally forbade again and again and again anybody from filming her. I think it's part of her contract to say, I don't want to do certain things. I just want to write. On her website, on the website that her official website, I've listed 2 links there because one website will take you to the entire listing of things in the menu except for her paintings and drawings. But you can get to the drawings with that other link, and it looks like it's part of the Annie Dillard link, but from here, you can't find the paintings and the drawings. There's no link to it. So that's why I gave you both links. But here you find her books, her biography, essays. You see also a pretty lengthy set of scholarly journal articles that have been written about her, including some that I have included on the internet resources. This one by Eugene Peterson that was posted in 2009 at this one place, except it's from 1986. Eugene Peterson, well, who's he? Let me just remind you, he's the person who did it's not a translation, but a kind of summary of, if you will, or paraphrasing of the Bible in the version called The Message. Back in 1986, when she is barely, I think, 41 years old, Eugene Peterson wrote this wonderful appreciation for her. And I have listed where you can find it and read it online at a website. There's also an article by John Freeman that's posted in 2016 about how you can contemplate the infinite, with Annie Dillard contemplating the infinite as well, there on Poets and Writers. It's actually on Literary Hub, but it was initially the same month that he put it on Literary Hub. It was published in Poets and Writers. Notes for Young Writers is another piece that she wrote, but I want to quote from her website. She was at a college and she gave a lecture, and she was talking to young writers, and then she thought of some other stuff that she wanted to remind them of. And so she wrote this Notes for Young Writers, and they published it. Now, that was in 1997. As of 2019, though, on her website, she listed as one of the things that she has written, but she says, do not read this crap. Well, she is a self-effacing wit and sense of humor, but also I think that she would go back to that give it all, give it now statement from the writing life and just say, go for it, write, do it now. Then in 2016, also in the Atlantic, there's this plaintively, I think, a plaintive cry by the reviewer who has received this copy of a thing called The Abundance, which is old essays and one new essay. There was only one new thing in there, but it's kind of representative book. And maybe it fulfilled a contract that she had with the publisher. And he writes, where have you gone, Annie Dillard? Because she has not produced very much since the 1999 when she published For the Time Being, which is, I think, a monumentally important and significant book. I thought you'd like to see some of her artistic renderings beyond the printed page. These are watercolors and paintings that she has, a self-portrait of her there in the middle. I think you can see William Faulkner, the middle left. She does Hemingway. She does Primo Levi. She does nature scenes, whether it's an old oak. I think this is up in Massachusetts where she lived, but then also down in Florida, which is the lower right scene. That's an oil that she does. If you go to the next slide, you'll see Thelonious Monk in the upper left-hand corner. There's an abstract that she does. That's a kind of almost cubist piece. There's a picture of India in the upper right-hand corner, paralleling the picture of Little Richard. And then nature scenes, some from Florida, some from Virginia. And then Mario Cuomo. She's pretty representational. I mean, she nailed Little Richard, I think, but the Cuomo piece is not it's not, maybe she meant it to be more abstract, but she's no just fledgling artist. She's a pretty good artist, visual artist. So there we have it. Let's go to the next slide. What's so special about her? I suggest that she illuminates these really important tensions between the profane and the sacred. She's mystical and scientific. She calls herself a kind of a looker, a seeker. She's elusive of any kind of categorization, but also she embraces tradition. In this, she's, I think, unlike her daughter, who has engaged in writing that is very, very different than what her mother wrote. That's a good thing. All children should do that. She uses colloquial language for ultimate realities, the vernacular to describe the spiritual. And this is a line that I wrote in a review for the time being that I wrote for the Disciple magazine a while back, that she's as lyrical as a lily and blunt as a 2x4. She's unabashed and unhindered in her brute frankness regarding the fleeting, mutable character of human existence. Next slide. She has an adroit combination of deep, deep reverence for God's immanence and awe, and sometimes terror in the face of God's transcendence. She is persistently struggling with the most ancient of theological puzzles, namely the conundrum called theodicy. How can there be a good God in a world so punctuated, so saturated with evil, natural calamity, and moral turpitude? And in this, those three books that are listed there, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, Holy the Firm, and For the Time Being, take up that issue fully. Not completely, ever. No book does. And that puzzle can never finally be answered, in my opinion. She's enthralled by nature, and also she's enraptured by nature's God. Next slide. Her approach to the world and her faith consistently evades all attempts to be pinned down about specific religious commitments. And while she's obviously steeped in the multivalent realities of the Christian way, if you will, she remains wide open to revelations about mysteries from all traditions. She says, I'm no scientist, I'm an explorer. I'm also a stalker, or the instrument of the hunt itself. I hope and trust that I'm not portraying myself, or I hope I'm not revealing myself. I hope I'm not this way. I hope I'm not just stalking Annie Dillard, although that could be leveled. Maybe what I should do is just point you to her books, point you to her paintings and drawings, and shut up. Maybe that is what I should do. She said Christ's message is this: week after week, Christ washes the disciples' dirty feet, handles their very toes, and repeats, it is all right, believe it or not, to be people. She has other responses to the world and her faith. Next slide. She is aghast at how blithely anyone, but especially church people, can speak about and give homage to God. Why do we people in churches seem like cheerful, brainless tourists on a package tour of the absolute? Does anyone have the foggiest idea of what sort of power we so blithely invoke? Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. And when you look and repeat some of the words from the psalmist or from any of the prophets, she has more than just a point. We too blithely think la-di-da about this God talk, I think. Next slide. Confronting the end of life. I love what she says here. I think that the dying, and this is from one of her poems, I think the dying pray at the last, not please, but thank you, as a guest thanks his host at the door. And here I would point to one of the challenges for modernity, in that we are so full of stuff, especially in the West, especially in the United States, that I think that we can tend to lose the opportunity to live a life of gratitude. So consumed we can be with things and owning stuff and where we live and what we have. And we can live in that please, 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 gimme, gimme, gimme culture, and not finally have an attitude of thank you about the life that we've been given. Next slide. About praying, she says in Luke 11 and again in Luke 18, Christ demands importunate prayer, prayer that does not faint, but fatigare Deus, wearing out God. And I know that this is an experience that many have had. I would assume that several that are on this session today have had that experience. If you've had a loved one who's been plagued with a chronic illness, if you've looked in the face of catastrophic loss again and again and again, I think some of the people in Ukraine right now are wearing out God right now in terms of praying for an end to the assault on their country and their way of life. In the end, and these are the last lines in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, she offers a benediction. And I go my way, and my left foot says glory, and my right foot says amen. Upstream and down, exultant, in a daze, dancing to the twin silver trumpets of praise, which is not a bad way to conclude. If you'll just leave it right there, Brent, I want to tell a couple of stories about my encounters with Annie Dillard. One that happened right before I left community. Not unlike Annie Dillard resigning from the church, a youngster that I had baptized was having some difficulty and friction with her mother. Now, her mother said she was having a crisis of faith. And I don't know if it was a crisis of faith or not, but she said, would you talk to my daughter? And I'll just make her name Irene. That's not her name, but just to keep confidentiality or anonymity. And I said, well, yeah, I can talk to Irene. And so Irene came for an appointment. We met in the library. And I listened about her questions about faith. She didn't have very many. I think she had some questions about her relationship with her mother. That's not what her mother asked me to talk about. But she was so bright. She had been won a scholarship, and she was getting ready in the fall to go to a very prestigious prep school. and in the East, and she had won a full ride scholarship to this. And she had just finished the 8th grade, but she was so precocious in her capacity to read. I said, I think Annie Dillard would be somebody that you would like a lot. So would you like a reading list? We read Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, Holy the Firm, Teaching a Stone to Talk, For the Time Being, An American Childhood. We read almost all of the nonfiction narrative prose from Annie Dillard that summer for about 6 weeks before she went off to school. And I was thinking, what a privilege it was for me to be her pastor and to have this time of conversation. We would read, and then we'd also read some other poets. We read Sojourner Truth. We read Maya Angelou, as in addition to Annie Dillard. Just amazing stuff. I gave her some of the stuff that you have access to, these chapters out of this manuscript on Great Souls, Great Prayers. And it was pretty amazing to see her just soak it all up. Back in the late 80s, we were doing some things at Community Christian Church. This is the second story. And somehow, I do not know how I got this, but I got her home phone number where she was teaching at Wellesley up in Connecticut. And I called her to see if she would come and do a presentation at Community Christian Church. Because despite the fact that on her website now, and even back then, she said religion none, despite it's all throughout, the religion is there, the faith is there, it's in the books. And that's what she wants to present to the world. So I called her up and she said, well, you can't afford me. And I said, really? Oh, I felt like the cowardly lion in The Wizard of Oz. Put him up. I can afford you. And she told me the amount. And I said, you know what? You're right. We can't afford you. It was too. And then she explained why she charged so much. It would be so that she could keep fidelity to her main task, which was just writing and teaching. And it was an easy way for her to say no, rather than to weigh into the merits of the invitations that she would receive. She just put this thing so high that it just disqualified most askers, and it did me. We could not afford her. But at any rate, I appreciated her honesty and her strategy. Usually, if I don't want to do something, I ask people, what date do you have in mind? And then they tell me, and I look, and then I'll say, oh, no, I'm sorry. I have a funeral on that day. I can't do it. So, but that's my cheap way out of doing a gig that I don't want to do.
Can you talk a little bit more about the hypocrisy that she used as her reason for resigning from the Presbyterian Church when she was younger?
Yeah. And you can read about it in American Childhood. She thought, the pomp and circumstance of liturgy did not really match how people were living their lives, that they were going through the motions. They were paying lip service to values they didn't live out other times. By the way, our teenagers almost invariably, if they're paying attention, find this hypocrisy in us immediately.
Yep.
And they pointed out, we just don't simply learn very much from them. And she, in her high school years, could see this, and she acted on it. I mean, by the way, she mortified her parents. When she wrote this letter of resignation, she reported it later. And the minister called on the phone and said, the assistant minister is calling to talk with you. Why? Well, maybe because I resigned from the church. I quit the church. What?
How old
And
was she?
so this was an embarrassment to people that wanted to live a pretty quiet life, unperturbed. The hypocrisy that we all see of people saying one thing with their words and then living another thing with their actions.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Are we hoarding resources? If we say we should give sacrificially, but then we see no sacrifice on the part of our leaders. For right now, 70% of America says that we should help Ukraine right now and not buy Russian oil. That's what President Zelensky said. And we say we would be willing to pay more at the pump. Let's see how long that lasts.
Yeah.
70% of America says that they're willing to do that.
I don't know anywhere.
We'll see. But insofar as we promote the Prince of Peace at Christmas, how can you do that and also then laud war making?
Well, Putin and the Christians.
So I think it's actually, Liz, it's in our churches right now, the same hypocrisy that our teenagers will tell us, who are not babes in the faith, they're fresh in the faith. And we've taught them a certain regimen and a certain canon of literature that we say we believe in. And then they say, wait a minute, the king has no clothes.
Yep.
So it's not something that has been, that's rare in the American experience or even in churches anywhere, time immemorial. This has probably been going on since the days of Jesus.
Yes.
Well, humans are humans.
And I find it interesting that she was, I guess I'm not sure how to ask this, so let me just sort of throw this out. I find it interesting that in high school, instead of, as your student did, asking to speak to the pastor, she put her thoughts in a letter. She has continued to be a writer and doesn't like videos of herself. Is there, I mean, obviously writing is appears to be her most comfortable form of communication. Is that because it gives her time or?
Yeah, I think it gives her time to think.
Okay.
One of the theses of good rhetoric is, and writing period, if you cannot put it into a cogent way of written expression, you may not have thought it carefully enough. You may not have thought it through carefully enough. I know that that's true for me right now. I began a poem over the weekend, and I'm teasing out, I won't say what the poem's about per se, it's multivalent, but it's about human experience and perspective. Your experience, my experience. When can we have an our experience, or an experience that we can call ours? So, I've not, to use a Robert Heinlein line, I've not grokked it completely. I don't have the gestalt of what that thought is about until I finally finish this poem. And I think it's going to take me a little while. I wrote almost 8 stanzas, but I think I've probably got at least another 8 in me. And then the refinement process, to use Raymond Carver's, not challenge, encouragement, the real beauty, the real pleasure, at least for many writers, and I would put myself in this category, is in the editing process. I love to edit. I love to go over. By the way, the abundance that she published, which is her nonfiction narrative pieces, essays, I would imagine she engaged in some pleasure in editing several of those pieces different than when they were first published. So by the way, I think that her most recent, what was your words? The thing that she finds the greatest comfort or ease in expressing is actually in the visual arts. I think she switched from writing to painting and drawing.
My goodness.
Well, and
Now
I guess
that's,
I was trying to put that all in context then of her saying, just go for it, shout it, out loud and all of that. And I was thinking there's a little bit of a contrast there when you think about, the writing that takes all the editing and the refining and making sure that you've got the right word and the right sequence and all of that. Going back to her admonishment to do that, it's like, okay.
yeah, right. Well, she would maybe even quote an old hymn, new occasion teach new duties, says the old hymn, once to every one and nation comes the moment to decide. Well, the give it all, give it now is to get you over the hump from holding on to something for writing it later. Get it down on paper, get it there. Come on, do not. A lot of people don't engage in writing and wait. And Annie Lamott also cautioned against this. She said, Annie Lamott said, don't wait until you finally have something you think they will buy that you can get published. Just write. The writing is partially to get read, partially to get published, but it's mostly for the writers. The writing is a satisfaction for the person writing. Walt Whitman did not have a great audience for his writing when he did. And Emily Dickinson, her stuff was published years and years and years after she died. But she wrote. Now, did she write with a certain audience in mind? I think she did. But did she write for her own attendance to the words? Yes. And so now I thought you were going to say that there's some hypocrisy in Annie Dillard, that you say write, and she just stops writing. And she goes into expressing through the visual arts.
Painting, yeah.
I don't think it's hypocrisy, but I do think it's a turn in her artistic life that for her, so far as I know, we don't have the writing about that turning, nor do we have a video or an interview to reflect upon. But from what we can tell, she feels more comfortable now in doing it through the visual arts.
Well, and she certainly has a wide variety of visual arts, as you were the examples that you gave us, from very abstract to, specific individuals to nature to all sorts of things. And so it certainly gives her a broad type of expression for all sorts of things. So I can see where that would be fitting for her.
So I would say, to go along with what she says, give it all, give it now, paint it, draw it, sculpt it, make it, do it now, do it today, do it in your workshop. However, don't wait for the critics to approve you as the new Rembrandt or the new Picasso. Just do it.
Yeah.
By the way, I can't emphasize this enough. She was viewed as the inheritor of Thoreau's mantle, meaning,
Thoreau's mantle.
her thesis, her master's thesis is on Walden Pond, Life in the Woods. And she kind of lived that near Tinker Creek. And she lived it, and then she talked about it. But her engagement with all those questions has to do at least half with the problem of evil in the world. But she is championed by the eco-friendly people, the environmentalists, again and again and again, as somebody who is deserving of attention and repeated reading. But if you view her as just trying to save the earth, you miss something. She's not engaged politically like Wendell Berry is. By the way, Brent, I will put in the chat this thing that I see if I can find it here. I sent it yesterday.
I'll find it for you, Bob.
Can you put that in the chat? We had done such a beautiful engagement with Wendell Berry. There's a brand new article about Wendell Berry in this week's New Yorker. And I read it as a meditation just recently or yesterday. And I thought you all should have the link to it. Can you find it, Brent?
Yeah, I will.
I can find it real quick too.
Hey, Bob, while you're looking, my question, who is the pilgrim at Tinker Creek? Is it Annie Dillard or is it?
Is it Annie Dillard or is it the bug that she will describe? Is it the snake? Is it the reader? I would say the answer to all of that is yes.
So why was this such an effect?
Presumably, it's mostly her, you know.
I found it, Bob.
You found it? Okay.
Yeah. Why was the book so affecting to you?
I think she deals with real things. The mutability of life. We exist by virtue of the death of animals and the death of plants, right? Because that's what we eat. And some of those deaths are kind of gruesome and tortured. If you've driven through Dodge City and open your windows, I dare you to open your windows and drive by Dodge City. These are feedlots, by the way, out there. I think I went on the feedlot circuit. I recently drove back from Tucson to Kansas City, and I think I must have hit every feedlot that was from between Dalhart, Texas and Kansas City. I think I went by every one. And it was, it was horrible. I mean, the stink in them is pretty bad. But what Annie Dillard describes is honesty. And I liked how she would say it so honestly, but in a way that was fetching. And I really do believe, that she is as lyrical as a lily, but as blunt as a 2x4. And she combines this in such a way that you pay attention and it's memorable. And I walk through the woods and my left foot says glory and my right foot says amen. Oh my, that's the last line of the book of Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And she's described this wondrous way, chapter by chapter, of all the intricacies of wildlife and power and death and resurrection, even all throughout Tinker Creek. And you just say, this is holy. Now, I don't have the capacity to canonize it into scripture, but I need to pay attention to who this woman is. And then she wrote Holy the Firm, which is my favorite of all of her books, by the way. If I have a favorite, it's Holy the Firm. And she wrote it while she was living on Waldron Island, where there's maybe it was aspirational. Could I ever live in an island where there was no electricity? Forget about it. I like concrete and I like having a quick trip nearby. I mean, I like density that will then create enough public will so that we'll have public transportation and streetcars. I'm a city slicker. No doubt about it. But
And I can see how the things that Annie Dillard lived through and thinks about and reflects on would lead her to focus on that topic you talked about, the theodicy, in the wonders of nature and the depth of creation. How can God allow the evil and the bad things? And that is not an uncommon topic that your mind dwells on when.
Brent's question about what what captured me, I hadn't thought about this, Brent, but when I came back for the visit from Los Angeles, I knew that I was headed towards ministry. I only had 1 year of college under my belt, but I had 2 years of service as a CO. And I knew that I was going to go into ministry, and I was going to major in English. And I had 3 years of college yet to go in front of me. Part of it was she was asking the questions I knew that I would have to address as a pastor, as a preacher, if I wanted to have any integrity at all. Annie Dillard is in the deep end of the ocean. She's not in the shallow end of a swimming pool. I mean,
Yeah.
so, but hang with her and get through her work. I think Pilgrim at Tinker Creek is the place to start. But if you want the story of her life, or at least her childhood, maybe start with An American Childhood. And then that would take you up to the time when, after college, when she is writing Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. But do try to get into her. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderul writer.
I love your analogies. This is Pam, by the way, Brent.
Oh, sorry, Pam. Yeah.
But I love your analogies. They really give me pictures so I can internalize it. So.
Okay.
So Bob, are you suggesting that she's difficult to read, or are you just saying is that you have to?
I don't think she's difficult.
Read slowly, or go back and read.
I think it's something that you can luxuriate in. She's not a little cup of non-fat yogurt. She's not that. She's a full, coconut cream pie. I mean, and you don't eat the whole pie all at once. It may be really, really rich. She's the full Monty. She's the full 7-course dinner. She's not a snack. This isn't something that you can just pop off like eating a bag of chips. This is something that you need to savor and appreciate, because she has prepared this feast for you in her writing, and it's wonderful. Don't be scared off. Don't be, scared off from reading her, but do take some time. She's not difficult, but it is thick. The subject matter is thick. Her words are no bigger than any other words that any other writer uses, but she uses it so felicitously, so beautifully, that you want to take time to appreciate it.